disappointed that the life stories of the people have never been known. You talk about truth-telling. That is one aspect of it, but I think just everybody, everyone in this room who watches this, everybody has a need for some kind of validation of their lives, and I think this still helps validate what those people did and what now what they're doing now. I think it's really important to do that. I should also say I became interested in this because I first went to Hong Kong in 1990 in the University of Hong Kong, and I wanted, in my teaching, I thought, I don't want to teach about Britain. I'm in Hong Kong now, I need to use some Hong Kong materials for my teaching. And one of my colleagues said to me that if you need to teach about Hong Kong, you first have to write the stuff. And in order to write the stuff, you have to do research. Another one of my colleagues had already written a book about Hong Kong society in which he called the 1967 riots and the 66 riots. He just referred to them as a blip, a little blip on an otherwise stable and calm history of Hong Kong. And I had also read a book by Lau Siu Kai which said basically that Hong Kong people were politically apathetic. And I come from a working class background. My father was a construction worker and also a Labour supporter. And I just didn't believe those things. I didn't believe that the riots were a blip. I always think there is something behind that kind of trouble, a longer story to tell. And I didn't believe that people were politically apathetic. That also struck me. My gut instinct was that this could not be the correct story. So I began to look further for more details about these events. And I also taught the police in Hong Kong. And from some of those police officers and prison officers, they were able to help me, in fact, discover some more materials in archives in Hong Kong and here in Britain. The problem with the archives is, although, as Canto has shown, they tell some part of the story, of course they only tell the story from the view of the colonial officials who are counting numbers and indeed making comments about some of the YPs who were imprisoned, saying that they were psychologically immature and they need some ideological retraining. There was, in fact, according to the archives, a whole movement to develop a social work department and a special prison to detain them in order to re-educate them. And that never quite came off, I think partly because the government changed in 1970-71 with the arrival of MacDonald's. And a different way of re-educating people was that a new policy came into place at that point. But there is a lot of information in the archives because, of course, the colonial officials never really thought, when they were writing them, that anybody would look at them. So sometimes they are quite frank and very candid about things. They would never have put this on paper had they realized that somebody like Tanto was going to come along 50 years later and find out what they had written. They would have been much more careful about what they had written had they realized that, I think. The other aspect, though, of doing this research is my feeling is that there are more archives, first of all, because before 1997, the British in Hong Kong conducted something called a sensitivity exercise, which meant that they went through all the records and basically shredded anything they thought would be sensitive. Some of those documents, although they were shredded in Hong Kong, were sent back, copies were sent back to Britain. Some of them are in the National Archives here, some of them I have not yet found. And there are still some archives in Hong Kong itself. And my second suspicion is that there are also archives in Guangzhou. And I don't think anybody has looked on the other side of the border for records about 1967 from the Chinese perspective, the mainland's perspective. I would imagine there are records there also to be looked at in order to get another perspective on the events of 1967. So people like Canto and myself and Dr. Mark here, we all come to the National Archives and we try to find what Regina calls the truth. We're seeking truth, but these papers only give us part of the story, and it's the story we have to remember why these documents were written, what was their purpose, and who was writing them, and the fact that they may be biased in their documentation of events, but they can also be very revealing about the attitudes towards the young prisoners at the time.
And I'd like to ask Linda and Ramian as well.